Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Unfiltered Historian. We have a really special episode today, guys, and I'm really excited. I know I kind of jumped it out of nowhere on the other day when I announced it, but we are at our first episode of what seems to be quite a few, which is really exciting, called Talking Titanic with Bruce Morton. Bruce, welcome to an episode. I'm really happy to have you.
It's great to be here.
Yeah,
Hello.
well, I haven't really dove in too much with the Titanic a lot on this page. A lot of our talks have really strictly focused on the Civil War, or just some wars out here in the Eastern Theater. And being the Unfiltered Historian, we kind of started with that name because we didn't want to really stick to one area of history. We wanted to be able to talk about a lot of things. And when it comes to talking history, especially on this page, we don't just look at what's in the books and what's already happened. We like to see what people are doing in the field today to, either preserve history, study it more, or just be able to experience history in some way, shape, or form. And talking with you recently and, being able to hear just a little bit about what you do, it's really excited me to have you on this show because I'm like, this is a whole new topic that we haven't touched or ever covered on, or most of us probably haven't even learned about. And it's extremely interesting and it has a lot to do with history. So I'm going to sit back and be quiet. I'm going to let you take over the floor and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what's going on. And whenever you're ready, we can play the slideshow for you.
Yeah, great. Well, just to introduce myself, as you can see, I'm Bruce Morton. I'm an electrical engineer. I have been working at a company called OceanGate, and I started there back in 2019, fall of 2019, and in my presentation, I'll be sharing some details about it. But about me and my experience, I was hired to be the designer for a submersible, for the electrical design for a submersible that will be going to the Titanic. And so when I when I first got contacted by a recruiter, the recruiter asked me, so are you interested in working on submarines? And I'm like, no, I'm not interested in working on military stuff. He said, no, this isn't military. It's like private stuff. I'm like, really? Private submarines? And so I interviewed for the job, and I couldn't believe, I didn't even know that this company was near me. I live in Everett, Washington, just
Okay.
north of Seattle, actually, I live in Lake Stevens, Washington. It's right here.
Oh, nice. Yeah, obviously, it looks like there's a nice lake back there.
Yeah, and which is near Everett and just north of Seattle. And so yeah, I was like, wow, that's super exciting. So I started working at the job, and I have never worked on any kind of subsea stuff before. I've always designed things like cell phones and barcode scanners and such. So I have, but I'm flexible. I can learn, and so I started working with a team, a small company, to design this sub. And we had our first expedition to the Titanic this last summer of 2021.
That's awesome.
And it was my privilege to go on this expedition, and it was an amazing experience. And it was 6 weeks long that I was working at sea, along with the rest of the company and our customers, who we call mission specialists. And and I have so much to share, so many different aspects of both the design of the submarine, the uh, uh, the experience on the water, being at the Titanic, things that I've learned about the Titanic and its history. I'm also an amateur genealogist, and so I was able to share on the ship interesting aspects about genealogy and with the passengers and crew on the Titanic. And so there's I'll touch on that a little bit today too, but
Awesome.
we'll talk about it extensively, because I think with your audience being into history, that's one place where an individual and history can connect, and I can help you and your audience to learn about how they can connect with the people on the Titanic.
And that is a perfect fit for this show. I mean, it literally fits the mold of what we would love to like put out there and have people do. So that's what we're about. We like to open that door and give people the opportunity to see history in a way they've never seen it before, and even bringing connections like that. That's just incredible to this. So I appreciate you bringing that and offering that.
Sure. So it was such an amazing experience for me. I've been wanting to share it. I've had presentations at a university, at a retirement home, at my church, with friends. And I have a friend of mine has a podcast, so I was on his podcast about it. I
Awesome.
went, when I was on the expedition, I wrote a daily journal because I knew this was like such a unique experience, and I don't normally keep a journal.
Right.
But I wrote like an hour or more every day just of the experiences of that particular day. It's just
Oh, that's
because
awesome.
there was just so much going on. It was such in many ways, it was it was the most stressful time of my life. And
I
I'll
can see
say
how that
that.
could be a thing. Yeah.
But I'll go into all that. But just to give a little more context, after the expedition was done, the it was I was totally exhausted. Everybody was exhausted. They gave everyone a couple weeks off, and so I came home and reconnected with the family, got caught up on a whole bunch of things, and then went back into work. And I went into work, and I was like, "Oh, I've got nothing left to do." I spent 2 years working so hard trying to get this goal done, getting this one project done. But once the project is done, I was done.
Right.
So there was really not much for me to do. And so I started looking for another job, and I found another job, and I have another job, and I'm working from home now, and I'm in the process of setting up my home office. So it's a little bit messy here.
I understand.
But
I'm in the same boat.
yeah. And so I left OceanGate. I will preface this with the fact that I in no way speak for OceanGate. Everything here is just my own personal experience, and so this is just my own opinion. I definitely don't speak for the company,
Right.
but I am still a contractor for the company.
Cool.
They don't need me to design another sub or design this sub, but they do still need me for things that come up, for maintenance stuff that come up. And so as things come up, I'm still contracted with them to help out here and there, and maybe even go on the next expedition. I don't know. We'll
Wouldn't that
find
be
out
cool
in
to go
the next
back? Mm.
few months. But anyway, with that context, let's start the presentation so you can look at the
Absolutely.
slides instead of just looking at me.
Let's do it. There we go.
Great. All right. So let me slide my windows over. And okay, good. So um, like I said, I've given this presentation in different forms to many different groups. And one thing I've found is that if I try to squeeze everything into 1 hour, it becomes rushed and frenetic, and I end up talking too fast and not able to really answer people's questions. And so this this is just going to be a subset of everything. So I'm just going to focus here on the company and on the sub, and I'll give you teasers onto other things that we'll be covering in the future if you decide to invite me back.
Oh, you're coming back. Absolutely. We got you.
So um, uh, so this is an early rendering of what the Cyclops sub, or one of our subs, was to look like. And I'll show you actual pictures of what the sub ended up looking like. But OceanGate subs are a little different from most other submersibles in that they're 5-person subs, large viewports, and not just the configuration is different from most, and you'll see others that'll show. Like I said, we'll be covering the company, we'll be covering the design of the sub and the expedition and the Titanic history and we'll cover at other times, but also I should have time today to talk about the future directions for OceanGate.
Okay, perfect.
So we have OceanGate started in 2011. Basically, Stockton Rush was he's from a rich family. He's got a lot of money behind him, and when he was young, he wanted to be an astronaut. But he figured out right away that he's wealthy, but not wealthy enough to be able to build his own rocket company like some guys around here
Mm,
uh, that we know of, like
right.
Elon Musk and others. So what he decided to do is go in the opposite direction. Instead of going up, he decided to go down and to be a ocean explorer. And he also wants to be an inventor. He doesn't want to just make something that we're just use standard um, methods and techniques to create submarines. He wants to break new ground, use new technologies to do things in a new way. And you could say that Elon Musk is doing the same kind of thing. No one had ever imagined, not even NASA had thought of putting the rockets up and having the rockets land face up. And it's a beautiful thing when it's actually successful. And so that's what we've done at OceanGate. We've done things in a completely different way. Our sub has different features, and I'll be going over that.
Mm-hmm.
So the company is small. This is kind of mostly a company shot. We have some of our customers in here too. This is from our expedition. And the purpose of the company, like I said, is not just for us to go to the ocean, but to open the ocean for exploration for citizen scientists. If people can pay to go to space, well, people can also now pay to go to the depths of the ocean. And because not anyone can just go and say that they want to join a scientific expedition.
Right.
Now, the difficulty here is that we operate outside of normal regulations. If you were to make a tourism company and you want to take people onto tours of a reef or something, you can use a Coast Guard approved boat and take people out on a ride, and you have to pay, and you operate within regulations. But the thing is that we are so small, and nobody else has ever done, or nobody else currently does anything else that we do. We operate completely outside of any regulations, not because it's what we're doing is wrong. It's just that no one in the government has imagined us or anyone doing anything that we're doing.
Right.
And so we are trying to work with the Coast Guard to become certified, but they have to create a whole new set of regulations for us. And we can't just sit around and wait for them to create regulations for us. So we just operate. We just do what we do. And the way that we're able to work around any kind of regulations is we're not in the business of taking people on rides down to the Titanic. They aren't called passengers. They aren't really called customers. We call them mission specialists.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, the idea is that they are joining us to be part of our expedition, and they have to do work too. The people who are on the ship, they aren't just coming and this is not like a cruise. We'll have them do things like prepare drop weights and to prepare the fairings for putting the fairings back on, or many other tasks that are needed to maintain the sub and recharge the sub and get it all ready for the next dive. It's a major operation. It isn't as simple as like taking your boat out onto the lake. There's a lot of preparation when it comes to diving and operating and the sub. So we Stockton started out making a hobby sub. It's this one in the upper left-hand corner. It's called Suds. And this is literally, it looks like it's made out of propane containers. I wasn't around, of course, when they made this. And it wouldn't surprise me if they actually did make these out of propane containers.
It does look starkly
Like,
familiar, like a propane container. Yeah.
yeah. And it's got wood, and you don't put wood on a sub. It's just, it doesn't work. But yeah, he did what he had to do to make it work, and that's on a regular boat trailer. But this was just his first little experiment. The first real sub that they've had in the company is this one on the upper right called Antipodes. This used to be a larger vessel, and it's been modified over the years. And it's the thing that's really cool about it is you can't see it in this picture, but there are two hemispheres on the sub, one in the front, one in the back, and it can seat 5 people. So you can have 2 people sitting on the front looking out this full 180 degree dome, and 2 people in the back. So everyone has a front row seat. The pilot sits in the middle, and it can only go down 1,000 feet, but that's perfect for the Puget Sound, which is where we're located.
Right.
And it's a great sub for developing one of the patents that we have in the company, that is for this diving platform. It's basically the idea that one of the most difficult parts of diving a sub is getting it in and out of the water. Once it's in the water, it works great. It can maneuver, it can go up and down, but that whole process of getting the sub out of the water and getting people in and out of the sub, it becomes very cumbersome because it sits low in the water, and it's not safe to load people in and out when sitting in the water. And also, how do you get it in the water? Do you have a crane? Cranes are expensive. Cranes are also problems because when you have seas that are moving, the swells can cause that sub to swing around, and when you have like a 25-ton sub swinging around on a crane, that is not safe.
No.
So you'll see pictures of our diving platform that we use for Antipodes and Cyclops and Titan. So Cyclops is similar to that first slide that I showed. That this is what it actually looks like, where you have the full-size acrylic dome. All the electronics are in the back, and we have 4 thrusters, 2 verticals and 2 horizontal thrusters for maneuverability. And it has a hatch, a little dome hatch on the top for people to get in and out.
Okay.
Now the one that we took, the Cyclops can only go down 500 meters. What would that be? That's about 1,500 feet, maybe. How to get sense of meters to feet. So that's also just only good for shallow dives, relatively, compared to. I mean, it's deep compared to like any kind of military sub, but still not deep enough for the Titanic. So Titan is the one that goes to the Titanic, and I'll have pictures of that.
Awesome.
But sometimes I use. Let me just show you what the other subs that have gone deep. Sometimes I use submarine. Sometimes I use the word submersible. It's actually the proper term for this type of vehicle. It's called a deep submergence vehicle, or we sometimes call it a DSV. These are some of the DSVs that are around the world. There are very few that are in operation today. In fact, most of these are not in operation today. There's only 2 of these 5 are still in use. The one in the upper left is what's called Trieste. This was a DSV that was created by the Italian military back in the 50s.
Oh, okay.
And the U.S. Navy bought it from the Italians, ruggedized it further, and made it so that it could reach to the bottom of the Marianas Trench. And so you'll see it looks like a regular boat on the top, but then it's got this ball underneath. Well, the people only go inside this ball. The rest of this is full of diesel fuel. Now, does it run on diesel? No, it runs on batteries. The diesel is nice because it's an incompressible liquid, but it has buoyancy. So
Interesting.
it gives it makes it so that this is neutrally buoyant, because this pressure vessel is very heavy. I believe it was made of steel, not titanium.
Wow.
And so amazingly, uh, the U.S. Navy was able to send 2 men to the deepest part of the ocean, which is 7 miles down, 11,000 meters, before we sent a man into space. But hardly anyone knows about it. And then, so we visited the Marianas Trench, and then nobody went down there again for another 50 years. And then James Cameron came along and said, "Hey, I want to go down to the Marianas Trench." And so he made his own DSV. That's this yellow one on the right, and
It looks
yellow.
tiny.
Yeah, it is. It's only a one-person sub,
Oh,
and it's different because it's since most of the time it's traveling vertically. It's made like a missile, where it's pointing down, and it goes down, and then when it comes up, it goes straight up like a bullet. And
wow.
and so he made that with some people in an organization in Australia, and worked out well. But unfortunately, there was it was caught in a fire, and it has now been damaged and it's no longer operational.
Darn. That's
Yeah,
a cool concept too.
yeah. The one in the upper right is called the Alvin. Now
Mhm.
this DSV is very famous because this is the first DSV that made it to the Titanic. Um, what's his name? James Ballard, who who found the Titanic. He found it on the surface, and then the next year he came back in 1986. He found it in 85, and then like 86 or 87, he went down and actually visited the Titanic in this vessel. And yeah, as you can see, it's got a bunch of robot arms and all kinds of gear. This one is really meant. This has been the workhorse of deep sea research for many decades. But the thing is, even though it's named Alvin, Alvin is just a title. Um, it has been revamped many times, so there's nothing in the current Alvin that exists that was in existence from the original Alvin back in the 70s. I think that's when it was made. But like the Alvin has recently been upgraded so that it can go down to 6,000 meters, and it's Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute is in Massachusetts. It's a
Mhm.
private organization, and they do all kinds of research around the world. But it's expensive to operate, so you can't just say, "Hey, I want to ride to the Titanic," and then they'd be like, "Okay, give us a few $1,000,000."
Yeah.
They probably wouldn't even be interested in doing that because it's not they're not into that sort of thing. Now, these subs, you probably recognize the one in the lower left is the Mir. That is a DSV there's actually 2 of them. There's Mir 1 and Mir 2. These were made by the Russians,
Yep.
and they were made in the 80s. And these are the ones that were used by James Cameron when he went to the Titanic. And you'll recognize they were actually in the movie Titanic.
Hmm.
That's part of the beginning part. And there are others that have been made around the world, but the most advanced DSV ever made is this one in the middle, and it's called the Limiting Factor. It's made by a company in Florida called Triton Subs. And there was a rich guy. His name is uh, Vescovo. I forget his first name. His last name is Vescovo.
Hmm.
He wanted to go to the Marianas Trench, and um, and so he uh, basically spent about $50 million for Triton to make this sub for him. And once they were able to, now this is it's a titanium sphere. It's a 2-person submersible. It can seat, like I said, it's 2 persons. It has 3 windows, and it's the shape is really weird. It's shaped like kind of like a suitcase.
Yeah, I was looking at that. I was like, huh.
Yeah. So it is built to go vertically up and down the water column very quickly,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's aerodynamic or hydrodynamic in that way. It's kind of weird when it's going forward through the water. It's like it's not very, it's like a wall. It goes through the water, but it doesn't matter because it's going to go really slow when
Mm-hmm.
once it's at depth. It doesn't matter. But yeah, this is an amazing vehicle. And there are videos out there that go into depth on how it was designed and all. It's got a robotic arm, and they had issues diving it, but they worked through all those, and so now they have it has been to what are called the 5 Deeps. They did an expedition in 2019 called the 5 Deeps expedition, and
Mm-hmm.
they went to the deepest part of each of the 5 oceans in the world. The interesting thing is that the deepest part of those 5 locations were not known until they did this expedition. I mean,
Really?
yeah, so they had to actually find those locations while they were out there. They kind of had a rough idea because many of the deepest parts of the ocean have not been, as you can understand, not explored yet.
Mm-hmm.
So that that's what they did. They found the deepest parts and they went there. And there's a video that they produced on that too. Really interesting. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
So, what about Titan? Titan is different from the others, and these are the distinct things about it. It's the largest capacity DSV in the world. And what does that mean? Those other subs, those are 2 and 3 person subs. This sub holds 5 people.
Mm-hmm.
What's an extra 2 people? Well, that's a big deal, actually, because if you can take, if you have 1 pilot and 4 passengers, there's a lot of economies of scale to take that many people down to the Titanic versus if you can only take 1 or 2 passengers. And actually, what we do is we have 3 passengers. We call them mission specialists. 3 mission specialists, a scientist or archaeologist, and a pilot. So that way, the people who are in the sub will be able to not only see what they're looking at, but know what they're looking at. Because it doesn't, if you go down to the Titanic without any kind of guide, other than the bow, you have no idea what you're looking at.
Right.
It just looks like lumps of rusted old metal. But if you have someone in there going, oh, that's the reciprocating engine. Oh, that is the captain's quarters. Oh, that is the telemotor where the ship was steered from. Then it becomes a really interesting expedition and makes it worth it going. So anyway, largest DSV in the world. Has a carbon fiber hull. There's titanium domes on the front and back for the pressure vessel, but in the middle, it's a cylinder of carbon fiber. And I'll go into that. Why would we use carbon fiber? Because, well, I have a slide on that too. So that's further down. It has the largest viewport in the world for that depth. It's you'll get I have a picture of that later on. It's about, I don't have a real measurement for it. It's about, it's big enough for 2 people to look out the window at the same time.
Okay. Now you have some comments over on our Facebook page. For some reason, it isn't filtering comments over here, so I can read them to you. The first one,
okay.
Barry Rhodes over on Facebook asks, "How deep is the Titanic?"
The Titanic is at 3,900 meters.
Okay.
And you'll have to do the conversion into feet. I think it's like 12,000 feet.
And then, in your opinion, this is from Todd Rhodes. In your opinion, is the Titanic being loved to death?
That is one of the controversies about the Titanic, and I'll just dive into that right now.
Yeah.
The Titanic is decaying no matter what we do. The Titanic's just it's the metal part of it is rusting and
Mhm.
being destroyed. A lot of people, uh, there are two main camps when it comes to the Titanic. Some people look at the Titanic um, as a grave site that should not be visited, should be left alone, should not be disturbed, and that people shouldn't even go down and take a look because it was such a tragedy. It's like, for some reason, people feel like, if you go down there, you're disrespecting the people who have died. I can understand that point of view. Another point of view is that it is an archaeological site. Uh, the bodies and bones are long gone. There's
Right.
no trace of human remains down there at all. But what there is down there is the ship itself, the steel, the glass, the what is preserved are the bottles and and the floor tiles and the plates and the dishes and all there's even luggage. Leather doesn't. I was surprised to know that
Yeah, that's
leather does
interesting.
not deteriorate.
Really?
Uh,
So, does that explain the shoes? I mean, because some of the shoes were made of leather too, right?
exactly. So
That's so
you'll
interesting.
see shoes and clothes down there,
Mm.
and and
Clothes
suitcases.
too.
What's that? Clothes?
Clothes
Yeah,
too,
I think
yeah.
so. I think clothes too. Maybe not clothes, maybe not fabric, but a lot of things are preserved in there.
Yeah.
But even if you say, okay, oh, those things are preserved, they should be left alone. Well, it's like I said, it's an archaeological site. Thousands of artifacts have been pulled up, and if those had not been pulled up, they would be lost to the ocean. And why would it be valuable? What value is there for those things to be destroyed by nature?
Right.
Why not preserve them and remember them and honor the dead by seeing and what they had, and possibly even returning those items to their ancestors? And some of those things have been done. Some of those things have been returned to their
Oh, that's cool.
ancestors. I think even letters have been preserved and returned to their ancestors.
You got
But
another
anyway,
good
so yeah,
question right
that's
there.
a big controversy. There's even
Yeah.
legal issues attached to the Titanic because the British government, the Canadian government, the U.S. government
Mhm.
do not want people to go and visit. If they if if they had enough resources, the governments would have prevented us from going. We had to go through a bunch of legal hoops and in order to be able to do what we wanted to do. But we're doing it anyway because they're not able to really enforce their desires. Like
Right.
the NOAA, the National Oceanographic Administration,
Mhm.
they didn't want us to go, but they're not willing to go put enough effort to sue us to prevent us from going.
All right.
Uh, but what we tried to do is try to work with the officials, and we had some government officials with us on the ship to try to work with them to convince them, hey, look, what we're doing is respectable. We're not disrespecting the dead. We actually had a memorial service on the surface
Mhm. Oh,
uh,
that's awesome.
every week that were out on the dive. But anyway, okay, so back to the slide.
Mhm.
The There is no hatch on this sub. It, when you get in and out of a normal DSV, it's through a very tight hole to get into the pressure vessel. Uh, Stockton, our founder, didn't like that. He wanted something that was more convenient for our mission specialists. And so that front dome, it swings open. There's a hinge on the other side, and it completely swings open so that you can get into the sub without having to squeeze through a tight hole. And it's very convenient because when it came to assembling the inside of the sub and all the
Mhm.
electronics, getting in and out is being able to bring things in and out of the sub, being able to assemble major sections of the insides and be able to just slide it in and insert it into the sub made assembly super easy. It would
Right.
have been so much more difficult if we had to bring in each individual part through a tiny hatch and then assemble it inside. So really, it facilitates not only entry and exit of the passengers, but also of the all the items that go into the construction of it. We have a toilet. One of the main things that people are worried about when they get on this sub,
Wait,
and we tell them, "Oh yeah, each dive is about 10 to 12 hours," and they think, "Oh man, how am I going to hold it for that long?"
10 to 12 hours. Oh yeah, I mean all the time on the ocean floor. But that brings up something. Again, I'm
Uh-huh.
sorry for the questions, but we got some really good
Okay.
questions coming in. How quickly can Titan descend and ascend when exploring the
Okay.
Titanic?
Okay. So the typical dive is it takes about 2.5 hours to get down, and 2.5 to get up, and then there's about 4 or 5 hours of bottom time.
Hmm.
So that's about how long it takes.
Well, and then the pressure was also.
The pressure, I don't have a number off the top of my head, but the pressure is at that depth is enough to kill you instantly.
I've
It
heard
is,
that.
yeah. There's the pressures at that depth are unfathomable. You just cannot imagine how much pressure, and yet there's creatures down there.
Right.
Uh, but the way that they're able to survive down there is because they have no air gaps. Our lungs, we breathe air, and all any kind of air gets completely crushed, gets completely dissolved. And so one of the things that we do is we have these just to kind of demonstrate that we'll put on the outside of the sub, we'll attach a bag full of styrofoam cups, and styrofoam cups, since they have that has air in there,
Hmm.
and those cups get totally crushed, and when you bring them back up, they stay crushed, and so you'll take a cup that'll be a normal size cup, maybe about 5 inches tall. You come back and it looks like a shot glass.
Wow.
And so yeah, and so
That's crazy.
the hull has to be extremely strong, and there can be no gaps, because any kind of crack or gap, water would just come streaming in.
That's it.
Yeah, and it would be there's no way that people would be able to come to the surface fast enough to be able to survive.
Mm-mm.
So yeah, a hull breach would be instant death. So yeah.
Safety is
Uh,
important there. Then I mean,
yeah,
it
yeah,
shows you want to build the best.
and I'll go into what we did to make sure that we had safety.
Sweet. Yeah, this is great. No, thank you for the questions, guys. You're asking good stuff. I love it.
So the toilet is basically it doubles as a front seat. And I have a picture of it, and now people will think, oh, well, it's not as private, but it's like there's a privacy screen, so people will be able to hear and smell, but it's tight quarters in there.
Yeah.
So the way that the sub is steered is through a wireless game controller, just like an Xbox controller. It's actually like
That's cool.
so it's
No
it,
kidding.
it's nice because you're able to pass around control from person to person. So somebody can be sitting in the front dome and can be driving around, or they can be sitting in the back looking at the large screens. And we have no seats in there per se. It's just an open floor, and you'll see a picture of that. And then there's large media screens on the inside so that people can see what the cameras are seeing on the
Okay.
outside. And so this is what it looks like inside.
No
It's
way.
very Spartan is not the right word. It's very basic. There's not much in there because everything is digital. It's kind of like a Tesla, in that it's the there's two controller screens and a
Mhm.
media screen in the back, and you see there's a power button. You can see the power button right there, and
Yeah.
there's a panel that flips out that controls all the circuit breakers.
Okay.
And other than that, there's just a keyboard for each of those screens. One computer screen controls all the systems on the sub, and the other one controls all the media, like the cameras and the sonar.
Okay.
And so it can hold 5 people. very comfortably. In fact, one thing that's nice about having open floor is that people can rearrange their seating location. So two people can be sitting in the front looking at the dome. If somebody wants to lay down, there's enough room for somebody to lay down. It's pretty convenient. We do have these like little like stadium seats so that someone can have something to sit back on, but it's pretty convenient. This is my daughter. She's sitting on that toilet. It doubles as a front row seat. So you lift the lid off that, and there's the toilet.
That's awesome. The
And you can
convenience
see
for sure.
the viewport screen here in the upper right. It's very thick glass. It's like about 5 inches thick or so, and it doesn't distort the outside. It's optically, it looks like just a flat window when you're sitting there underwater. But
Wow.
in actuality, it's concave on the inside and convex on the outside. And now, when we built the well, I'll go into the testing later. But this is the pressure vessel all by itself. Is right here in the lower right. We had it on the back of a truck, and we sent it all the way to the East Coast to be tested. I'll go into details on that later.
Okay.
So that kind of gives a sense of scale of what it looks like with the.
What's an interesting aspect of seeing a submarine? I've never seen like the bare bones of it before. That's actually very fascinating.
Yeah. And so from that, we had to build up all around it. We had to put all the thrusters and the cabling and all the electronics, and it was a bit of a process to build that.
Oh, I can imagine.
So the core, the most basic part of the sub is this center hull, this of the pressure vessel, and it's made of carbon fiber. It's 660 layers of carbon fiber tape, and it's 5 inches thick and 55 inches in diameter and 100 inches long. It's and what are the advantages of it? So it's carbon fiber. Not only is it strong, but it's lighter than the comparable amount of titanium. It also weighs less. It also costs less. So when you the weight of your pressure vessel is very important when it comes to a DSV, because you have to make your sub neutrally buoyant. Now, if you have something that's really heavy, you have to compensate for that by having foam to make it lighter. So if you have a large pressure vessel with very thick steel and it's very, very heavy, like if we were to make this out of titanium, we would have to have an inordinate amount of syntactic foam, which is the type of foam that we use. It's a special type of foam that is incompressible and can withstand the pressures at the deep depths and will not be distorted. And so you end up with a sub that will be super big and unwieldy and not easy to maneuver. For our sub, for Titan, it was so light that we only needed just a little bit of syntactic foam in order to keep it keep the trim so that it's level in the water, because otherwise it would tilt forward it would tilt forward if we didn't put any foam on it.
Right.
So we're able to have a smaller size overall of the sub. So this sub is about the same size as those other DSVs, but it holds twice as many people.
We got another question on Facebook, if that's all right. He said, this is Todd Rhodes again, can the wreck be penetrated with an ROV controlled from Titan?
Yes, that is one of the things that we plan to do in the future.
Awesome.
So James Cameron did that in one of his documentaries about the Titanic. He had some ROVs that went into the Titanic and saw the rooms. And I know the questions are about the Titanic. I will get into that eventually, but I wanted to get into this. So anyway, what's this contraption? This is the robotic arm that was used to lay down all those 660 layers of tape. This is a company in Mukilteo, Washington, near us, that called Electro Impact. And basically, this is a robotic tape dispenser. That's a very simplistic way to think of it.
Right.
Takes these little strips of carbon fiber tape and it lays it down in a very precise way so that it doesn't overlap from layer to layer as it goes around, and it also heats it up as it's depositing it. So because you have to, this thing at the very tip is a heater, so it deposits that tape and in a very precise manner, and we had to do it in. Actually took months. It actually took a couple of months for this robot arm to build that hull. It was a very long process, but we learned along the way. We did some test builds before we built the actual hull, and so we knew how to avoid the issues that we were having earlier. And so we had a pressure vessel that was actually rock solid. It was so. Let me go back. This pressure vessel, or this carbon fiber hull. One thing that we do, I didn't mention, we monitor the safety of the hull in two different ways. We use acoustic sensors and we use strain sensors. The acoustic sensors listen for ultrasonic pulses that can happen. The microscopic carbon fibers, when they're under pressure, the hull does flex. Even though it's 5 inches thick, that carbon fiber moves very small amounts, a few millimeters, but that's enough for some of those fibers to break. Now, those fibers, if enough of those fibers break, then you're going to have a hull breach and people will die. So if we can listen in and hear those fibers breaking, we can know ahead of time if it's going to fail. And so we use that as a predictive process. The good thing is that the first time we tested the hull, we put it into a hyperbaric chamber. We could hear those fibers breaking, but then on all successive dives, successive tests, it was quiet. So we kind of like worked out all the kinks out of it. So it's kind of like a spring. So under pressure, it compresses a little bit and then it relaxes, but there's no more fibers that break. So we had no issues at all with the hull. It was really nice. So we designed the sub in CAD before we built it in real life. And the nice advantage of this is that we had all the parts built and ready to go, so that when we got that hull back from testing, we were able to assemble the sub in just about 2 months. With just, we assembled it by hand, of course. And so that was really fast, both the insides and the outsides. We were able to assemble, and it worked out very well. So the external systems on the sub there's 4 thrusters, there's cameras and lights, we have buoyancy control. The way we do buoyancy control is we have a ballast bag and we have a high pressure air tank. It's kind of like similar to scuba diving.
Okay.
And then we have drop weights that control buoyancy. So when first diving, the sub is very heavy and it drops. And then when it reaches the bottom, we drop a few weights to make it neutrally buoyant. And then when we're done diving, we drop a few more weights to make it positively buoyant. So then it'll go back up. So basically, the fuel for part of the fuel that allows us to go up and down is steel pipe.
Okay.
And then we have tracking systems. The sub doesn't know where it's at when it's underwater. GPS doesn't work. Compasses do work, by the way, but we have a ship on the surface that has access to GPS, and the ship uses a sonar system to monitor where the sub is. And so, and we know where the sub is in relation to the ship, and so then we can guide the sub to where the wreck is. So we can say, hey, as they're dropping, hey, you need to go a little bit northeast, or you need to go a little northwest. So we can kind of guide them as they go down. And I was very impressed. On every one of our dives, we ended up right on the wreck. It was very good. Very expert systems. And then there's communications. There's a VHF radio from when we're on the surface. And the communication, we send and receive communication over texting. It's like a sonar modem. And so it's not voice communication. It's all just typing. All right, so go down. Here we go. So this is what it looked like naked without any covers on it. Well, at least most of the covers are
Right.
off of it.
Jeez.
So you can see the batteries and the motor controllers and all the cabling. I like this picture because this shows my handiwork. This is all the I made the circuit boards and these
Oh, that's
cables
too
that would go all
cool.
around. It was a lot of work to route
It
this.
looks incredibly difficult. I mean, props to you for that.
Yeah. And then there's internal systems. There's internally, there's 3 computers. There's we have a computer for we have home monitoring where we, like I mentioned earlier, where we listen for sounds of the home. We have CO2 scrubber and an oxygen supply. So it's very interesting how it's very simple how to monitor and to maintain the atmosphere inside the sub. The way that we basically, all we have to do is we take CO2 out of the air and we put oxygen into the air, and then people can survive. And the way that you pull CO2 out of the air is by taking a box with this powder. It's called soda, and you blow air onto this powder, and it absorbs CO2. And so basically, it's just a box, a plastic box with a fan on top of it.
Okay.
And then for oxygen, we have these bottles of oxygen, not air, just oxygen. And it's amazing. A bottle of oxygen that's only about maybe 2 feet by 10 inches cylinder, that's enough air, or that's enough oxygen for 5 people for 10 hours.
Wow.
So, now we have emergency supply of oxygen that can last 5 people for up to 3 days, and we have enough absorber for 3 days. So if they get stuck down there, we've got a few days to help them in order to get help and to bring them to the surface. Fortunately, we didn't have that issue.
Good.
Okay, so then there's batteries, there's circuit breakers, there's power distribution, there's internal Wi-Fi only for the internal, doesn't go external. Radio signals do not travel through salt water at all. And then we have water detection, because there's condensation inside the sub, and there can be some water that can condense on the bottom of the sub. And so what I worked on, all these systems that I just showed in the last screen are right here. This goes into that rear dome that doesn't have the window. So this gets pushed into that hemisphere, and there are the 3 computers. There's this power box on the right, and there's custom circuit boards that I've got to connect it all together. And the wiring for this was very tedious.
Good Lord.
So yeah, this was represents a lot of work, and but it was, fortunately, I was able to do most of the wiring when it was outside the sub, and then once we had the sub, we could just slide it in, and that was just I can't imagine having to assemble this all inside the sub if we had just a hatch. So here's what it looks like when we first tested it on the vessel. And I mentioned earlier about our diving platform. This is our diving platform.
Okay.
The sub sits on the platform. The platform is this has 4 hollow air chambers. And so when the platform is on the water, it floats. And then we have these valves. And when we want to dive the sub, we let the air out of those chambers, and the whole platform sinks. And so then the sub, when it's underwater, can fly off of this platform without any divers being in the water.
Oh, neat.
And so it's safer for divers. It's safer because we don't have to have a crane, and we're able to the sub can be kind of autonomous, or in that it can fly off, and when it wants to come back up, it flies back onto the platform, and then operators raise the platform, and we're working on a system where where the pilot themselves can raise the platform. But yeah, that's in the future. But yeah, this is off the back of the ship, we built this ramp, this big orange ramp you see. That was they built that for us so that we could launch the sub, and that's a huge piece of machinery. And but
I'll say, yeah, it is.
yeah, and but we're going to use that year after year for the expeditions. So I'll in a future presentation I'll tell you about the expedition itself and be able to answer questions about the Titanic and what we saw and everything. I'm sorry,
Mhm.
I'm sorry if that was. Some people may think that's too much detail about the sub, but that's what I
No,
worked
I
on.
think this is perfect. This is, like I said, a whole new aspect that we're learning about today, and I
Yeah.
can't appreciate it enough.
Just to, it's just to give people an appreciation for how difficult it is to
And you
get to the.
deserved it. You worked hard on that thing. I can tell just by looking at those wires and just some of the stuff we were describing there is
Yeah, it's
too cool.
and then so it, it's not as I mean, getting to space is difficult too, but yeah, it's it was in the opposite direction. Anyway, so what's going on with OceanGate right now? We have raised the price of going to Titanic to $250,000. Uh, and now some people say that's expensive. Some people think that's cheap. Depends on your perspective, I think. But the reason why it's that expensive is because there's a huge support to be able to do that. That sub is expensive to build and it's expensive to operate, and it's no easy task to bring a huge 18 ton or 18 kiloton vessel out to basically the size of a small cruise ship out to the
Yeah.
ocean, dive this sub over and over again, and to do it safely. So right now, the company is working on getting more customers, more mission specialists. So the sub is currently on the East Coast, going around the country on a tour. So for your listeners,
Hmm.
uh, I don't. Unfortunately, these events that they're showing the sub are not public events. In other words, someone can't just come off the street and pay a few dollars to see the sub.
Right.
These are invitation only events, really geared towards people who are qualified or able to actually afford to go on the Titanic. But if you are one of those people who could actually uh, possibly afford to go onto the OceanGate Expeditions website and apply. And there's a bit of an application process,
Mhm.
and then uh, if you get qualified, then you'll be invited to come and take a look at the sub, and maybe even go on a test dive right here in the Puget Sound, and experience and see if you're the right for it. Not everyone who wants to go or even can afford to go can go, and the reason why is because some people, when they get in the sub, they realize, oh, I'm claustrophobic, and they can't stand it. Or if they're if they have like a rough personality or I don't know. So there are certain types of people who, if you're going to be sitting in a vessel for 10 to 12 hours and you can't stand being with them, we don't want them to come along.
No, understood. That could make for a
So,
miserable experience.
yeah.
Yeah.
And we discovered that last time. There were a couple of people that we thought were going to be really good, but they were not too
Not
easy
too
to work
good.
with.
No.
So we have there's a lot of new. There's some engineering work. There were a few issues that we had, and I'll talk about that next time. That we had to repair
Mhm.
and improve, and those changes are being done now. In fact, I've been consulting with them to make sure that those fixes are done right, and so next year's expedition should go even smoother than this one did.
Awesome.
And there's other things to see. A lot of people say, well, can't you do something other than the Titanic? Well, the Titanic is not only is it such a famous wreck, but it's also a sure thing. When someone pays $250,000, they want to make sure that they're going to actually see something interesting. The whole idea of exploring the bottom of the ocean, you you may not see something You may go
Right.
down and see just nothing but just bare dirt, and that's part of what exploration is all about. So, if we'd like to be able to take people on and see other things, but until we can find people who are willing to take a risk and do some real exploration, we're going to be doing the Titanic, and probably only exclusively the Titanic. So, um, but that's pretty much, we're at the hour mark. That's pretty much all I've got for today.
Okay.
Uh, I will go into more of the expedition, my experience there, the issues that we had, there were some scary moments, some very stressful moments, um, things that you would never think would happen happened, and some that border on terrifying things that happened. That
Wow.
happened. Nobody got hurt though.
That's good. Hey, as long as everybody walked away with everything, that's good.
And and then I'll go into this. This is the first
Oh,
slide of another. Oh, there's one more slide I want to
sorry.
do.
There you go.
There's this slide. This is the opening slide of a presentation that I gave on the ship, and this has to do with Titanic genealogy, and that is this question: are you related to Titanic passengers or crew? And the answer to that question is yes. I can virtually guarantee that you and almost all of your viewers are related to somebody on the Titanic.
Really?
How can that be? Well, I'll say the word. You're not a descendant. That you're probably not descended from a Titanic passenger, but you are related to a Titanic passenger. So by distant cousins. And so I'll go into how you can find out how you're related to them through distant cousins, and
That is
what I found.
cool.
And it's pretty slick how you can find that out. So, and here's my last slide.
Oh, I
It
love
was
it.
beautiful out there on the ocean, and this was sunrise one day out there at the Titanic site. And
Oh,
so,
really? This was at the site.
yep, yep.
Beautiful.
Dolphins swimming around, mahi mahi swimming around, birds flying out. I was like, what are birds doing out 400 miles out in the ocean? Well, they were flying out there on the surface.
They
It
were
was
there.
amazing. But yeah, it was quite an experience. So I have time for questions.
Yeah. Let's see if we have any more on Facebook over here. It looks. How much insulation against the cold is required at depth?
Very good question. Okay,
I like that one.
insulation. Insulation is something that we can go back to. Let me see. I'll stop sharing. Okay. So insulation, I'll be frank, is something that is not even considered
Really?
on the vessel, on the submersible. Why? Why wouldn't you want to have? Well, it's just not something that's even a concern. What happens is the water, of course, yes, it is very cold. The water is just barely above freezing at that depth, and that cold temperature conducts right through the titanium. And so the front and rear domes that are made of titanium, they sweat, condensation big time, because there's people breathing out, and so there's all that humidity condenses, and it actually produces a couple of gallons of water over the course of a 12-hour dive. And that water just sloshes around on the bottom. And when we open the door, the water just pours out. and we have now all the batteries for the sub, all the internal batteries on the sub are in the very bottom of that middle of that cylinder. But we have it raised up enough that we don't have to worry about the leads of the batteries to get wet. So the good thing is the carbon fiber does insulate. So in the middle of the sub, this is interesting. The pilot is sitting in the middle of the sub or towards the back. And what I was told is that it's a comfortable about 65, 70 degrees where the pilot is sitting. But in the dome, where people are sitting looking out the window, it's like 50 degrees, 45 degrees. so,
Jeez.
and so it's like, how can there be that much of a temperature gradient? Well, that's what they said. And so the insulation that you have is just the clothes that you wear. On the surface, you're going to be hot because it was in the summertime. The water is 70 degrees. The air is about 70, 80 degrees in the summertime. And so it's hot when you're first at the start of the dive. So you want to have those extra layers that you can add on layers later. So as you start the dive, you go deeper and it starts getting colder and colder in the sun. It's important. Just put a hat on and people were fine.
Yeah, that's crazy. I didn't even think about that. Like you would think they would be considered, but no, you added a tremendous amount of information as to why.
Yeah,
That's something I never considered myself either.
things you learn about. So
Yeah.
I can't see any. I guess there's questions on Facebook. So I don't know how it works.
Yeah, I've had issues with this one page, in my personal page in particular, with like the comments not wanting to post. Todd's back again with the question, which is awesome. He's been hitting these good questions tonight. What is the max dive time for breathing air? How quickly can it ascend in an emergency?
Okay, so the typical, like I said, the typical dive is about 10 to 12 hours, but we have emergency supply of that Sodasorb and that oxygen. We have 4 huge bottles of oxygen that are under the floor. And you can see that in actually one of the slides of that CAD drawing. There's enough absorber and oxygen to last for 5 people for 3 days, for about 36 hours. No, wait, no, not 36 hours, 72 hours. Yeah, 72 hours. So yeah, that's mainly for emergency purposes. The typical dive, the oxygen is just enough for one bottle, called our day bottle.
That's crazy. You said that it was a 2 foot by.
Yeah, it's about a bottle, about about so big that has all the oxygen you need. You really, because oxygen. See, most of what the air that we breathe is 80% nitrogen. So oxygen only takes up about 18, 19% of the air, and since it's a gas, it compresses, and so you really you don't need that much.
Right. Did you have a backup rescue sub on hand?
We didn't. We have an ROV. There's an ROV on the vessel, and so if we have multiple safety systems. I didn't get into that. If the drop weight system were to fail, the backup is to use a hydraulic pump to release some pins, and that drops the weight carriage. So the whole weight carriage would drop. If that fails, we have another hydraulic system where you turn a lever and then you pump some more, and there's some what's it called? Some hydraulic. It's not hydraulic. It's more of an air pump. It's like an air pump that pulls some pins and it drops all the legs.
Okay.
So that really makes the sub super buoyant, and those would be under an emergency situation where we couldn't get it up. Now, if the most likely thing that could happen is outside of like a failure of those systems, like the batteries go dead or whatever, is there could be a snag where like the sub gets too close to the Titanic and maybe gets entangled in with some cables or some netting, and it tries to back out and it can't. So then what would the most likely thing that it could get snagged onto are the legs of the sub. Okay. And so if we can just drop those legs, then the sub can come up. And if for some reason it got entangled into something that it couldn't get untangled from, then or it couldn't get away with it by itself, then yes, we would send an ROV down, and ROV would cut whatever cable is ensnaring the sub, or to release whatever weights are causing the sub to be too heavy, so that it can release, and then that would be the case. So
Awesome. Let me make sure there's any more comments at all. It doesn't look like it. Bruce, thank you for joining us tonight, and we'll talk about next episode whenever we can get some time. We can try to
yeah,
set something up for another one because I would definitely like to continue this if you'd come back on the show for sure.
yeah, we can talk again in a month or so, and
Yeah,
I'll have plenty of more stuff to talk about.
sounds good. Well, I'll be in
We'll get
touch.
into the Titanic itself.
I can't wait. I just can't wait to hear about this expedition. See, you got it kind of as a cliffhanger here, so I'm excited to dive into that more as well. Well, thank you again so much for joining, and you have yourself a wonderful evening, okay?
Thank you. All right.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Bye. And folks, we will be back again this weekend on Sunday to do a brief check-in about Fredericksburg because we do know we have the Fredericksburg episode coming back soon.